Mafia in Los Angeles, the city of angels, a place where dreams are born and where they die in the most cruel way. When we think of organized crime on the streets of LA, the notorious street gangs immediately come to mind. The Bloods, the Crips, or perhaps the powerful Mexican cartels and the traditional Italian Cosa Nostra, which have been operating in the shadows of the Hollywood signs for decades. But today, we are telling a story that has been almost forgotten in the files of the FBI and the local police. A story that didn't begin in the glamorous villas of Beverly Hills, but in the dark, rundown backyards of Budapest. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our channel, Hungarian Crime. Today, we look at a ruthless gang that traveled all the way across the Atlantic to build their own criminal empire in sunny California. In the media, they became known by a name that initially sounds almost harmless, even downright absurd: the Hungarian Paper Mafia. Yet behind this name hid a stone-cold network of fraud, extortion, betrayal, and murder. A network into which innocent citizens, corrupt lawyers, and even one of Hungary's most famous rock stars were dragged. And right in the middle of it, a man named Béla Markó, a gangster so dangerous that people said he shot first and asked questions later. How did a group of Eastern European refugees manage to lead the Los Angeles authorities by the nose for years? Why did a brilliant guitarist have to die? And how did this era finally end in the brutal turf wars that shook the Budapest of the 1990s? Lock your doors and get comfortable. Welcome to the dark world of the Hungarian Mafia in Los Angeles, right here on Hungarian Crime. Chapter 1. The Roots of Evil. Budapest, 9th District. To understand how this deadly drama in California took its course, we have to turn back the clock. We travel to the Hungary of the late 1970s and early 1980s. The country was behind the Iron Curtain at the time, in the stranglehold of communism. But anyone who believes that there was no crime in the socialist system is gravely mistaken. In secret, the underworld flourished. And the epicenter of this underworld was a very specific place in the capital city of Budapest, the notorious 9th District, also known as Ferencváros. If you walk through this district today, you can still see the traces of the past. But back then, over 40 years ago, the area was an absolute rough neighborhood. It was a quarter considered particularly run down. The building facades were scarred by the soot of the factories and the bullet holes from the 1956 popular uprising. The streets were bleak. The poverty was palpable. It was an environment where you quickly had to learn how to assert yourself. Whoever grew up here either became extremely hardened or went under. Exactly in this milieu, Béla Markó grew up. Even in his youth, it was clear that this man would not lead a normal, honest life. Markó was no petty criminal who stole out of necessity. He possessed a very special, menacing aura. Contemporaries, and those who had the dubious pleasure of crossing his path, later described him as an absolutely merciless human being. He was unpredictable, a man who did not engage in long discussions. If someone stood in his way or questioned his authority, he did not hesitate for long. His reputation preceded him. Béla Markó was the type of gangster who shot first and asked questions later. Around the year 1980, Markó had already made a name for himself in the Hungarian underworld. More than that, he belonged to those pioneers, to the brutal bandits who established organized crime in Hungary in the first place. They built structures, extorted protection money, and controlled the black market. But Markó's ambitions already reached far beyond the borders of the Eastern Bloc back then. He was extremely well connected and already possessed excellent contacts overseas, directly in the United States of America. Persistent rumors existed at the time, which still make the rounds today. It is claimed that Markó and his gang received direct orders from Los Angeles. The task? To systematically rob valuable art objects, antiques, and historical treasures in Hungary, only to smuggle them to America via twisted paths and illegal channels, where wealthy buyers were already waiting with thick stacks of cash. It was a lucrative but highly dangerous business. However, the pressure at home grew. The Hungarian authorities no longer watched the gangsters' activities idly. In 1981, the state pulled the plug. A highly specialized special police unit was created with the sole objective of putting an end to Markó and his gang. The investigators put massive pressure on the criminals. The ground in Budapest was visibly becoming too hot for the villains. Béla Markó recognized that his time in Hungary was up. If he did not want to disappear behind bars for many years, he had to vanish. And so in 1982, he used his international contacts and fled Hungary. His destination? The west coast of the USA, sunny California. The city of angels was already waiting for him. But Markó did not come to start a new, honest life. He came to take crime to a whole new level. Chapter 2. Arrival in California and the birth of the Paper Mafia. When Béla Markó arrived in Los Angeles in 1982, he was by no means entering uncharted territory. A well-established Hungarian community already existed in California, and as is the case in many immigrant communities, a criminal offshoot had formed here as well. Markó did not hesitate for long and joined an organization that was already causing headaches for local authorities, the so-called Hungarian Paper Mafia. But where did this curious name come from? When people think of the mafia, they think of drugs, prostitution, and illegal gambling. So why, of all things, Paper Mafia? The name was actually literal, yet it emerged from a legal facade. The organization was significantly linked to businessmen who were officially active in the paper and stationery business. They owned warehouses, stationery shops, and distribution companies for office supplies. At first glance, these men looked like hard-working Eastern European immigrants trying to achieve the American dream. But behind the scenes of the stationery shops ran a perfectly oiled fraud machine. The legal paper business was basically just the cover for the gang's criminal machinations. And these machinations were carried out in a highly unfair, aggressive manner. The method was simple but psychologically clever. The gangsters picked up the local phone book and systematically called unsuspecting citizens. Over the phone, people were told that luck was on their side. A great, exclusive gift was waiting for them at a specific stationery shop in the city. There was a catch, however. The gift could not be mailed. It absolutely had to be picked up in person at the shop. Driven by curiosity and the joy over the supposed prize, people made their way there. But as soon as the victims entered the shop, the trap snapped shut. They were not greeted by friendly salespeople, but by trained, extremely pushy criminals. The gangsters talked at the customers for so long and so aggressively, putting them under such psychological pressure that the intimidated people did not end up leaving the shop with a free gift. Instead, they bought completely overpriced office supplies and stationery often at a multiple of the actual value of the promised gift. It was a perfect form of rip-off that brought the organization reliable income. Yet that was just small change. The Hungarian Paper Mafia generated the lion's share of their illegal income with a completely different, far more lucrative method: systematic and large-scale insurance fraud. Here, the organization focused primarily on private vehicles, especially expensive luxury cars. The system was brilliantly thought out and worked like a Swiss clockwork. A Hungarian immigrant bought an expensive car and insured it heavily. After some time, the vehicle was reported stolen to the American insurance company. The insurance company reviewed the case, found no irregularities, and paid out the large sum to the owner. The Hungarian Mafia generated the majority of their income, however, through insurance fraud, mostly in connection with private vehicles. Here, the gangsters essentially used two different, stone-cold methods. On the one side, cars were simply reported stolen, although in truth, they were long on their way to Hungary, where their new owners were already waiting for them. On the other side, accidents and property damage were willfully brought about to purposefully cheat the insurance companies in the USA out of high sums. Interestingly, only Hungarians were involved in the entire chain of insurance fraud. It was an absolutely closed system. Not only the respective policyholders belonged to this network. When accidents were faked, the auto mechanic who wrote the matching courtesy estimates was a compatriot as well. And even the representing attorney was Hungarian. If the insurance company did have legal questions or did not want to pay after all, he stood ready immediately to represent the interests of the mafia. At this point, one must of course ask a justified question. Does such an organization even live up to the term mafia? If one compared the Hungarian gang to the notorious Italian mafia that was active in Los Angeles at the time, the Hungarian faction seemed almost insignificant. The Cosa Nostra controlled entire sectors of the economy and had judges and politicians in their pockets. The Hungarians were far from that. Nevertheless, we must state fairly, the local press in California did not hesitate. Due to the tight hierarchy, the brutality, and the closed system, the gang was permanently referred to in the media as the Hungarian Mafia. And as we'll see in a moment, they soon did that name total justice. Chapter 3. The heads of the gang and the first internal murder. Every criminal organization needs a structure. It needs a brain to pull the strings, and it needs muscles to enforce the orders. In the Hungarian Paper Mafia, these roles were clearly distributed. A man named Csaba Simon was considered the undisputed brain of the organization. Simon was not a thug. He was a cool analyst, a strategist, who coordinated the logistics of the paper fraud and the complicated processes of international vehicle smuggling. He ensured that the numbers were right and that the money was washed. But strategy alone is not enough in the underworld. You need someone who is willing to get his hands dirty. And this role of the tough guy was taken over by István Szendró. Szendró was the man for the rough stuff. He collected debts, intimidated unwilling business partners, and caused fear and terror within the Hungarian community. He was undoubtedly a hard character, someone you better not mess with. But in the life of a gangster, there is one golden rule. There is always someone who is even tougher, even more ruthless. And István Szendró was about to learn this lesson in the most painful way. Because he was not tough enough for the man who had newly joined straight from Budapest in 1982, Béla Markó. It was only a matter of time before the egos of these two brutal men had to clash. The tensions within the organization finally escalated during a private house party in Los Angeles. What began as a social gathering among compatriots quickly turned into a deadly drama. Alcohol flowed, the mood became increasingly hostile, and a heated disagreement broke out between István Szendró and Béla Markó. Details about the exact course of the argument are rare, but the result was clear. Markó, true to his reputation, did not hesitate for long. He drew his weapon and shot István Szendró right at the party. The tough guy of the Paper Mafia was dead, executed by a man who had just fled Hungary. Yet the amazing thing about this deed was the legal aftermath. One would think that such a murder in the middle of a party would have meant the immediate end of Markó's freedom. But far from it. Béla Markó got off completely scot-free from the entire affair. In court and to the investigators of the LAPD, he and his lawyers managed to present the deed as an act of self-defense. Allegedly, Szendró had threatened him first, and he had merely defended himself. Due to a lack of witnesses who were willing to testify against the feared Markó, the fear of revenge was simply too great. The proceedings were dismissed. Markó was a free man again. His power and status within the Hungarian underworld of Los Angeles were absolutely untouchable after this incident. Chapter 4. The Riddle of Tamás Barta, a rock star in the crosshairs. We now come to what is probably the most tragic and, to this day, most mysterious chapter of this story. It is the fate of a man whose name in Hungary actually stood for art, success, and freedom, but who found his death sentence in the dusty streets of Los Angeles. Tamás Barta. Who was Tamás Barta? In the 1970s, he was an absolute superstar in his homeland. He was the brilliant guitarist of the legendary Hungarian rock band LGT, Locomotive GT. The band celebrated huge successes, filled stadiums, and was considered the flagship of Hungarian rock music. Barta was a virtuoso on the guitar, an idol for a whole generation that longed for Western freedom. But fame in socialist Hungary was not enough for Barta. He wanted the international breakthrough. He wanted real freedom. At the end of a U.S. tour by the band in the late 70s, he made a fateful decision. He did not return to Hungary. He stayed illegally in the USA. He became a defector. But reality in America was sobering. The dream of quick fame in Hollywood burst fast. Barta was a nobody in the USA. The competition was gigantic, and he could never really gain a foothold in the American music business. Money became tight. Desperation grew. And in this vulnerable phase, he met his compatriots. He fell into the circles of the Hungarian Mafia in Los Angeles. From a celebrated rock star, he became a henchman in the dark business of the paper and insurance mafia. It was a connection that was to end fatally. In 1982, the exact year Béla Markó also arrived in L.A., Tamás Barta was found shot dead in Los Angeles. He was torn right out of life, murdered at the age of only 33. To this day, decades after the deed, it is not known exactly why the former LGT guitarist had to die. His death is one of the biggest unsolved riddles in Hungarian criminal history, and still provides material for numerous speculations. There are essentially two theories that are repeatedly discussed by investigators and insiders. The first theory states that Barta had tried to double-cross the organization. It is said that he had come into possession of a secret list of names. On this list were allegedly all those involved in the massive insurance fraud, from the car owners to the mechanics to the corrupt lawyers. Barta, some suspect, wanted to use this list to blackmail the leadership of the mafia and thus score a large sum of money to finally finance his dream life in America. If this theory is true, the musician vastly underestimated the cold-bloodedness of the gangsters. Such extortion was a death sentence in the eyes of people like Csaba Shimon or Béla Markó. The second theory leads into another dark milieu. Some investigators suspected a drug story gone wrong behind the murder. Los Angeles in the 80s was flooded with cocaine, and it was no secret that parts of the Hungarian Mafia also tried to get a piece of this market. Did Barta come into contact with the wrong people? Did he owe money to the wrong men? The absolute truth about the end of the Hungarian rock star will probably never be known. The Barta file went cold. What remains is the tragedy of a genius who fell victim to the darkness of the mafia. Chapter 5. The Bloody End in the Wild West and the Return to Budapest. The year is 1990. The star of the Hungarian Mafia in the USA was already on the decline at this time anyway. The FBI and the local police had figured out the structures of the paper mafia better and better, and the pressure was growing by the day. And for the feared Béla Markó, fate was to strike in the most brutal way this year. It was an evening in 1990 when Markó was at a venue in Los Angeles. The atmosphere was tense. By chance, Detective Russell Kuster was also in the same bar. Kuster was an experienced, highly decorated officer of the Los Angeles Police Department. He was not a man to look away when danger loomed. It happened as it had to happen. A heated argument broke out between the detective and the Hungarian mafioso. The situation escalated within seconds. It was like in an old Western movie, only in the middle of modern Los Angeles. Both men reached for their weapons almost simultaneously. Shots were fired. A loud bang echoed through the venue. Panic broke out. When the gun smoke cleared, a picture of horror presented itself. The shootout ended fatally for both men. Detective Russell Kuster passed away from his severe injuries. But Béla Markó, too, the man who throughout his life had shot first and asked questions later, was mortally hit. Exactly this unpredictable brutality that had once made him powerful had now caused his own death. The king of the Hungarian underworld of LA was dead, having died on the floor of a Californian bar, while the era of the Hungarian Mafia in Los Angeles collapsed with the death of its key figures and the pressure from U.S. authorities. Something historic was happening on the other side of the world. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the political system changed in Hungary. The Iron Curtain fell. Communism collapsed. For many of the Hungarian mafiosi who were stuck in Los Angeles and hunted by the police, this was the signal to return. They packed their bags and turned their backs on the west coast of the USA to return to their old homeland. But they did not return as reformed men. They brought the know-how of organized crime from America with them. Arrived in Hungary, the returnees split up. Some stayed in the classic criminal profession they had learned in LA, but many of them saw a new, even bigger gold mine. They tried their luck in so-called oil bleaching. Oil bleaching was considered by far the most significant, lucrative illegal business in 1990s Hungary. Through chemical processes, tax-advantaged heating oil was converted into expensive diesel fuel and sold with astronomical profits. Billions of Hungarian forints flowed into the pockets of the criminals. But the sudden wealth and greed inevitably led to the final collapse. The story of this generation of organized crime, which once began in the backyards of the 9th District and led via Los Angeles, ultimately ended in the big, bloody Hungarian Mafia war of the 1990s. It was a dark epic for Budapest. Suddenly, the city was no longer safe. Brutal attacks occurred on the open street. Car bombs exploded in broad daylight. Hand grenades were thrown into venues. Contract killings were the order of the day. The various gangs, including many of the old returnees from the USA, fought each other to the blood for supremacy in the oil and black market. When innocent bystanders and casualties finally had to be mourned in these brutal attacks, the limit was reached. The Hungarian population was in a state of shock. The state could and would no longer look away. The government cracked down with full force. Special units were mobilized, laws were tightened, and the state finally cleaned up the underworld radically. The leading heads were arrested, locked away, or fled abroad. It was the definitive bloody end of a criminal generation. So, what remains of the Hungarian Paper Mafia from Los Angeles? It is the story of men who thought they could outsmart the system, of Béla Markó, whose spiral of violence ultimately caught up with him, of the brilliant musician Tamás Barta, whose life found a much too early, mysterious end in the shadows of L.A., and of a gang that proved that crime knows no borders, neither geographical nor moral. If you liked this video and want to hear more about the forgotten cases of criminal history, then make sure to leave a subscription here on Hungarian Crime, activate the bell, and write your opinion in the comments. What do you think? Why did Tamás Barta really have to die? Thank you very much for watching and stay safe. Until next time.